Welcome to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit, where the stories don't just scare you, they follow you home. Tonight, we're stepping into the wild. 3 tales of terror from the woods that'll make you question what's really out there. A camper stalked by shadows that know too much. Kids who woke something ancient with a single scream. A father and son hunted by a darkness that won't let go. What ties them together? Something's waiting in these forests, and it's hungry for more than just fear. Stick around till the end. Trust me, you won't sleep if you don't. Hit that subscribe button now, join the Nightmare Crew, and ring the bell so you never miss what's lurking next. Ready? Let's walk into the dark together. Thickened with fear as COVID-19 locked humanity indoors. But not me. I wasn't built for confinement. I'd always been a wanderer, a backpacker, a camper, someone who found solace where cell signals died, and the only sounds were wind and wildlife. So when the lockdown hit, I saw it as an excuse, an escape. My truck was packed, my gear was ready, and I pointed myself toward a Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. 3 hours of empty highways later, I was there, boots crunching through a thin layer of snow, chasing the kind of quiet most people were too scared to seek. I wasn't just running from a virus though. I was running from something else, something uglier. See, 2019 hadn't been kind to me. I'd made a mistake at my job, a big one, the kind that cost people money, lots of it. I won't bore you with the details. Let's just say it was enough to turn colleagues into enemies and strangers into vigilantes. My name became a curse whispered in break rooms and texted in group chats. I got hate mail, threatening calls, texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "You'll pay for this," they'd say. "We know where you live." I moved apartments, changed my number, quit the job. For a while, it worked. The storm seemed to die down, but the damage was done. I was a pariah, and I needed to disappear. That's how I ended up at the creek in Rocky Mountain National Park. It was early March, still winter up there, and the lockdown had scared off the usual crowds. The trail was mine alone. Every step a loud crunch through snow that hadn't softened yet. I hiked a couple miles in, following the sound of rushing water until I reached the creek. It wasn't frozen. Its current cut through the silence like a lifeline. I set up camp a little off the path, pitched my tent, chopped some wood, and started a fire. Sausages sizzled on my camp stove, and I cracked open a book, letting the flames dance in my peripheral vision. For the first time in months, I felt free. As dusk crept in, I rolled a joint. Nothing heavy, just enough to take the edge off. The weed hit slow, warm, loosening my shoulders as I exhaled into the crisp air. That's when my phone buzzed. I frowned. Out here, signal was spotty at best, and I didn't expect anyone to reach me. My family knew I was off-grid. They wouldn't bother me unless it was urgent. I fished the phone from my jacket pocket and saw a string of texts from an unknown number. Area code 2-3, Connecticut, I'd learn later. The first message read, "How's your camping going, buddy?" I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. Could have been a wrong number, a coincidence. But then the second text came. "It's beautiful out here." And the third, "I see why you came up here." My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't a random message. They knew I was camping. They knew where I was. The weed didn't help. Paranoia bloomed fast, twisting every shadow into a threat. I stood, spinning in a full circle, scanning the darkening woods. Nothing. Just trees, snow, and the creek's steady hum. I typed back, hands shaking. "Who is this?" No response. I grabbed my 6-hour P365 from my pack. A compact handgun I'd bought after the threats started piling up back home. I'd never fired it, not once, but its weight in my hand steadied me. I didn't douse the fire. The thought of total darkness was worse than whatever might be out there. I retreated to my tent, crawled onto my sleeping bag, and stared at my phone, waiting. Minutes dragged on. The high was souring, my mind racing. I tried to read, headlamp flickering over the pages, but the words blurred. I gave up, switching to YouTube instead, some murder documentary, because apparently I'm an idiot who picks the worst distractions. Then another text. Doesn't matter anymore. It was a reply to my question. My stomach dropped. I shot back. How did you know I'm camping? Silence again. The fire outside was dying, its glow fading to a dull ember. The woods were still, no wind, no owls, just that suffocating quiet that presses on your eardrums. I was about to kill the headlamp when I heard it. Footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate, coming through the snow. They stopped maybe 6 feet from the tent. My grip tightened on the gun. A flash cut through the darkness. Sharp, brief, like a camera or a flashlight. Then the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. My phone buzzed again. A photo loaded. My tent, lit from within. My silhouette visible against the fabric. The next text. Have a good night's sleep. Something snapped. The fear flipped to fury, adrenaline burning through the haze. I unzipped the tent, stepped out, and fired 2 rounds into the sky. The shots echoed off the mountains, sharp and final. I heard it. Footsteps running fast, crunching away through the snow. I yelled after them, voice raw. Come back here, you coward. No reply, no more texts. I stood there panting, gun still warm in my hand, until the cold drove me back inside. Sleep didn't come easy, but it came eventually. Morning light hit the tent, and I woke up alive. Whoever it was, they didn't come back. 5 years later, they still haven't, but that night didn't end there. Not really. That's where the story I told myself stops. The one I've repeated to make sense of it. The truth is worse, and it's why I'm telling you this now. See, I didn't leave the park that next morning. I should have. Any sane person would have packed up and floated back to civilization after a night like that. But I'd come for peace, damn it, and I wasn't ready to let some creep with a burner phone ruin it. I convinced myself it was over. Maybe a prank. Maybe one of those old enemies tracking me down for a scare. The gun had done its job. I'd scared them off. So I stayed. Day 2 was uneventful. I hiked deeper, fished in the creek, kept the gun close. The woods felt normal again, alive with birdsong and the occasional rustle of a squirrel. I set up camp a mile from the first site, closer to a ridge with a view of the valley. No signal out there, no more texts. I slept hard that night, exhausted from the adrenaline dump. Day 3 though, that's when it started. I woke to footprints, not mine. They circled my tent, pressed deep into the snow, bigger than any boots I owned. I told myself it was a ranger, maybe a hiker who'd wandered off trail. But the tracks didn't lead anywhere. They just stopped, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. I brushed it off, packed up, and moved again, this time to a spot near a cluster of pines, thick enough to hide me from prying eyes. That night, the text came back. Same 203 number. Moved, huh? Smart. Then, can't hide forever. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not family, not friends. How could they know? I turned off my phone, figuring it was pinging some tower, giving me away. I sat by the fire, gun in my lap, listening. The woods were too quiet again. No wind, no animals. Just me and the crackling flames. Then I heard it. A low hum, barely audible, like a generator miles off. It grew, vibrating through the ground, into my bones. I stood, scanning the trees. The hum sharpened into a sound I can't describe. Guttural, wet, like something choking on its own voice. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was wrong. I doused the fire, retreated to the tent, and waited. The sound circled me, closer, then farther, then close again. Footsteps followed, crunching, uneven, like they didn't belong to one person but a dozen, all out of sync. I peeked through the tent flap and saw nothing but darkness. No flashlight, no eyes reflecting the moonlight. Just that sound, that hum, drilling into my skull. It stopped at dawn. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. When I stepped outside, the snow around my tent was pristine. No tracks, no sign of anything. But my phone, powered off all night, was on. A new text. Look behind you. I spun around. Nothing, just trees. I laughed. A shaky, desperate sound. I was losing it. I should have left then. But I didn't. I stayed 5 more days chasing answers. Each night got worse. The hum returned, louder, joined by whispers, words I couldn't make out, overlapping like a crowd muttering in a language older than time. Shadows moved where shadows shouldn't, stretching too long, bending against the wind. One night, I woke to my tent shaking, not from wind but from something pressing against it, dragging along the fabric. I fired a shot through the wall and it stopped. The next morning, there was no hole, no bullet, just my gun, 1 round missing. On the 6th night, I saw it. Not the stalker, not a person, but something. I'd moved camp again, higher up the ridge, hoping elevation would keep me safe. The fire was low, and I was nodding off when the air shifted, heavy, thick, like breathing syrup. The hum was back, deafening now, and the whispers turned to screams, faint but everywhere. I grabbed my headlamp, swept it across the trees, and there it was. A shape, tall, too tall, standing just beyond the light's reach. It didn't move like a person. It swayed, like branches in a storm. But there was no wind. Its edges blurred, flickering, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I blinked, and it was closer. 10 feet away, still outside the light. I shouted, fired a shot. The bullet vanished into the dark, and the thing didn't flinch. It tilted what might have been a head, and the hum spiked, rattling my teeth. My phone buzzed. Impossible. Battery dead for days. The screen lit up. You brought me here. I ran, dropped everything, tent, gear, sanity, and bolted down the ridge, through the snow, tripping over roots and rocks. The hum chased me. The footsteps multiplied, a cacophony of crunching behind me, beside me, ahead of me. I didn't stop until I hit the trailhead, my truck a beacon in the dawn light. I drove 3 hours straight, shaking, sobbing, until I was home. The text stopped after that. The number never showed up again. I sold the gun, burned my camping gear, and swore off the woods. But it's not over. Last week, I found a photo on my phone. One I didn't take. It's me, asleep in my tent, that first night, headlamp glowing. Something standing over me, blurred, too tall, too wrong. And in the corner, scratched into the image, 203, what was it? A stalker who followed me from my past, fueled by revenge, or something else, something the mountains woke up when I fired those shots. I don't know, but I feel it sometimes, that hum, that weight in the air. It's waiting, and I think it knows where I live. That's the end of One Nightmare in the Rockies on NoSleep Nightmares Reddit. but the shadows aren't done whispering. Next up, a group of kids face something screaming in the Michigan woods. Something that doesn't let go. What do you think's out there? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's keep the fear flowing. Every October, when the leaves turned gold and the air bit just a little sharper, my family had a tradition. We'd pile into a couple of cars and head up to northern Michigan, where my Uncle Jim owned a sprawling 4-acre chunk of land. It was a big, rambling property, a 2-story house with 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and enough space to fit all of us. Me, my brother Adam, our sister, our 4 cousins, and a gaggle of parents who'd spend the weekend drinking, laughing, and reminiscing. The house was cozy, but the real draw was the land. Half of it was thick forest, marked by trees splashed with red paint, to show where Uncle Jim's property ended and the county's wild expanse began. Beyond that line, the woods stretched on for miles, dark and untouched, with no neighbors in sight. I was 13 that year, the oldest of the kids. Adam and our cousin Jake were 10, and little Joey, the youngest, was 9. Uncle Jim was a hunter, a fisherman, a man who'd disappear into the wilderness for weeks and come back with stories of deer, bears, and places so remote you'd need a map and a prayer to find them. My dad wasn't like that. He loved animals too much to hurt them, but he tagged along on a few of Jim's trips, mostly for the campfire tales. That weekend over lunch, the dads were deep in one of those stories, half drunk on beer and nostalgia, when Jake piped up, "Why don't we camp out in the woods tonight?" Adam, Joey, and I latched onto the idea like it was gold. A boys' night under the stars, just us, no parents hovering. Perfect. Our dads grinned, probably too buzzed to care, and said yes. Our mums weren't thrilled. "They're too young," Mum said, arms crossed. "What if something happens?" But Dad waved her off with a laugh. "They'll be fine. Jim's woods are safe." So, after lunch, Dad and Uncle Jim grabbed a tent and led us out, the 4 of us trailing behind with sleeping bags and flashlights, buzzing with excitement. We crossed the red-painted trees, venturing past the property line into a small clearing Uncle Jim called the deer beds. It was a patch of soft, mossy ground perfect for camping, he said. He'd used it himself plenty of times. The tent was huge, big enough for 4 kids, and setting it up was a mess of half-drunk instructions and us fumbling with poles. Dad and Jim laughed at our efforts, but we got it standing eventually. They left us there as the sun dipped low, promising to be back in the morning. "Don't burn the forest down," Dad slurred, and they stumbled off, leaving us alone. Night fell fast. We piled into the tent with our sleeping bags, flashlights arranged in a circle like a makeshift chandelier. I'd brought a deck of Uno cards, best time killer ever, and we played round after round, laughing as Joey whined about losing and Jake bragged about his winning streak. The woods were quiet outside, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. It felt like an adventure, the kind you dream about as a kid. Then we heard it, a scream, sharp, high-pitched, cutting through the night like a knife. It sounded like a girl, maybe a woman, and it was close. We froze, cards slipping from our hands. Joey's eyes went wide, and Adam whispered, "What was that?" I swallowed hard, trying to play it cool. "It's just a fox," I said. "They scream like that. I saw it on TV." It wasn't a lie. Foxes do sound eerily human, but even I wasn't sure. Still, it calmed them down. Joey nodded, and we picked up the game, pretending it hadn't happened. Half an hour later, it came again. Louder, closer. This time, there was no mistaking it. It didn't sound like a fox. It was too human, too raw. Joey whimpered, clutching his flashlight. Jake's bravado vanished, and Adam looked at me like I had all the answers. "Turn off the lights," I hissed. We scrambled to kill the flashlights, plunging the tent into darkness. We crawled into our sleeping bags, hearts pounding, whispering theories. "Maybe it's a hunter," Adam said. "Or a bear," Jake added. Joey just hugged his knees, too scared to speak. We waited, ears straining. The silence was worse than the scream. It pressed down on us, heavy and alive. Then crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps, fast and heavy, tearing through the leaves toward us. They stopped right outside the tent, and the scream came again. Ear-piercing, guttural, right in our faces. The tent shook violently, fabric rippling like something was clawing at it. We screamed too, Jake and Joey in pure terror, Adam and me yelling, "Get out! Get out!" I fumbled for the zipper, ripped it open, and we bolted, flashlights bouncing as we ran blind through the woods. It was chaos, branches snagging our clothes, roots tripping us up, the cold biting our lungs. We screamed the whole way, a chorus of panic, until we hit the property line and saw the house lights. Our family was already outside, drawn by our cries. We collapsed into their arms, babbling about the scream, the shaking tent. Mum hugged me tight, Dad's face pale. I accused them of sending our sister or cousins to prank us, but they swore the girls were asleep inside. Uncle Jim and Dad grabbed rifles and went back out, searching the woods. They found nothing, no tracks, no sign of anyone. The next day, we hauled the tent back, and that was it. We never camped there again, never even played outside after dark. That's the story I've told for years, the one that ends with a mystery, a scare we couldn't explain. But it's not the whole truth. See, we didn't just run and forget. Something followed us home that night, and it's been with me ever since. We thought it was over when we made it back to the house. The adults chalked it up to kids' imaginations, maybe a wild animal spooked by our noise. Uncle Jim muttered about coyotes. Dad cracked a nervous joke about Bigfoot. But I saw their faces. They didn't believe their own excuses. That night, crammed into the bedroom with Adam, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like those footsteps. Every gust of wind carried that scream. The next morning, Joey found something. He'd gone out to the porch to grab his shoes and came running back, pale as death. "There's stuff in the yard," he said. We followed him out, and there it was, scattered across the grass, just beyond the porch light's reach. Uno cards, not ours. Ours were still in the tent bag, untouched. These were old, yellowed, edges frayed like they'd been buried for years. They were laid out in a perfect circle, 13 of them, one for each year I'd been alive. In the center was a note, scratched in black ink. "You woke us." Uncle Jim burned the cards, told us to forget it. But I couldn't. That night, I heard it again. The scream, faint, drifting through the window. Adam heard it too. He bolted upright in bed, whispering my name. We didn't tell anyone. What could we say? The weekend ended, and we went home, leaving northern Michigan behind. I thought distance would kill it, that it'd stay in those woods. I was wrong. A week later, I found a card under my pillow, a red draw 4, crisp and new. No one in the house had put it there. Adam swore he hadn't either. I threw it out, but the next night, it was back, this time with a scratch on it. Play again. I started hearing the scream after that, not every night, but often enough. It'd wake me up, faint but unmistakable, like it was calling from the edge of our suburban yard. I'd look out my window and see nothing, just trees swaying in the dark. Months passed, and it got worse. Footsteps circled our house some nights, crunching leaves we hadn't raked. Shadows stretched too long in the streetlights, bending where they shouldn't. Once, I caught something on my old camcorder. A blurry shape at the end of our driveway, tall and thin, swaying like it was caught in a wind no one else felt. The tape hissed when I played it back, overlaying the scream with whispers. You ran. We didn't. I told Adam. He'd been hearing it too, seeing things. Cards in his backpack, scratches on his window. We dug into Uncle Jim's property after that, begging him for answers. He got quiet, admitted the land had a history. Old stories, he said. Settlers went missing out there in the 1800s, loggers too. Folks said the woods took them. Some cursed from the tribes who lived there first. I never believed it. He'd found stuff over the years, bones, arrowheads, a rusted knife, but he'd buried it and moved on. That's when I realized we'd crossed the red line. We'd gone where we weren't supposed to, and something had noticed. The deer beds weren't just a campsite. They were a boundary, a marker, and we'd woken it up. Years went by. I'm older now, living on my own, but it's still here. The screams follow me, faint some nights, loud others, always from the woods near wherever I am. Cards turn up in my apartment, my car, my damn mailbox, always Uno, always scratched with messages. Your turn. Deal me in. Don't stop playing. Last month, I moved to a city, thinking concrete would kill it. It didn't. I woke up to footsteps outside my 5th floor window, crunching, like leaves were falling on pavement that wasn't there. Last night, I found a new card on my kitchen table. It wasn't Uno this time. It was a photo, grainy and old, of 4 kids in a tent. Me, Adam, Jake, Joey, laughing over a game. Behind us, pressed against the tent wall, was a shape, tall, blurred, swaying, scratched on the back. We're still here. I called Adam today. He's heard it too, the scream, closer now. Jake won't answer his phone. Joey's mum says he's been sleepwalking, muttering about the woods. Whatever we let out that night, it's not done. It's patient. It's waiting. And I think it wants us to play one last game. The Michigan woods have screamed their piece on NoSleep Nightmares Reddit, but the terror's not over. Now, a father and son campout turns into a fight with something ancient, and is still watching. What's your guess? Tell us below, smash that subscribe button, and brace yourself for more. 2 years ago, my dad and I packed up the truck and headed out to a campground buried deep in the country. It was our thing, escaping the grind of everyday life for a few days of hiking, fishing, and sitting by a fire with nothing but the stars overhead. This spot was perfect, a sprawling park with trails, zip lines, and a river cutting through it, all steeped in history. Native American lands, they said, old as the dirt itself. We'd been there before, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the quiet. No crowds, no chatter, just us and the wild. The first night was everything you'd want from a camping trip. Families dotted the other sides, kids laughing, campfires crackling. We cooked hot dogs, roasted marshmallows, cracked a couple beers, and swapped small talk with the folks nearby. It was peaceful, the kind of night that makes you forget the world's problems. Dad grinned at me over the fire, his face glowing orange. "This is living," he said. I nodded, sipping my beer, feeling the tension of the past year melt away. The second day, the park emptied out. The staff told us we were the only ones left. No one else had booked a site. At first, we were thrilled. A whole campground to ourselves. That's the dream. We spent the day hiking, fishing in the river, even listened to a spooky podcast while the sun dipped low, laughing at how dumb it was to scare ourselves out here. By evening, we were buzzed from the beers, tired in a good way, and decided to trek to the park's info center to charge our phones and grab some snacks before dark. That's when it started. The walk back to our site felt off. The woods didn't sound right. The usual hum of bugs and birds was gone, replaced by a stillness that pressed against my ears. The sky had this weird tint, like twilight was clinging on too long, and the air felt heavy, thick, like we were wading through it. Dad stopped halfway down the trail, squinting into the trees. "Doesn't this feel strange?" he said, voice low. "Like we're in a dream or something." I nodded, my chest tightening. The forest stretched out endless around us, and for the first time, I wondered if we'd bitten off more than we could chew. Back at camp, we stuck close to the fire, trying to shake the unease. We didn't talk about it, didn't need to. We roasted marshmallows, played some music on my phone, even smoked a little weed to loosen up. Not your typical father-son moment, sure, but it worked. For a while. The sun sank below the trees, and the fire was our only light, a small circle of warmth against the black. That's when the first noise hit, a bang, loud and sharp, like a tree snapping in half. It came from the river, maybe 100 yards off, echoing through the woods. We grabbed our flashlights, swept the beams toward the sound. Nothing. No fallen branches, no animals, just darkness swallowing the light. "Bigfoot," I joked, forcing a laugh. Dad chuckled, but it was thin, nervous. We sat back down, brushing it off. A few minutes later, it came again, louder, farther off, but the same heavy thud. We shined our lights again, saw nothing. Then the third bang, closer this time, maybe 50 yards. My pulse kicked up. Whatever it was moving toward us. The fourth bang was the worst. 20 yards away, so close the ground seemed to shiver. Dad's eyes went wide, mirroring mine. "Get in the tent," he said, voice tight. We threw the last of the firewood on, hoping the flames would scare it off, and scrambled inside. I dropped flat on the floor, heart hammering, as Dad zipped the flap shut behind him. That's when the loudest bang yet hit, so close it rattled my teeth. Dad froze, staring out the tiny mesh window. "It's standing there," he whispered. "What's standing there?" I hissed, grabbing his arm. He shook his head, voice trembling. "I don't know. It's like a wall of darkness." He clutched the only weapon we had, a pocket knife, useless against anything real. Then came the hum. It started low, a vibration in the air, growing until it was inside us, tightening our chests. I've never felt anything like it. Sound and pressure all at once, alive somehow. Dad whispered, "You hear that?" I couldn't speak, just nodded, too scared to move. Then a new sound, a guttural alien growl, wet and wrong, like something from another world. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a cougar. It was other. We stayed frozen, me buried under my sleeping bag, Dad by the zipper with a knife. I wouldn't look out the window, couldn't. The fear of being seen was worse than the noise. It went on for minutes, the hum, the growl, circling us. Then, nothing. We blacked out. No memory of falling asleep. No slow drift into unconsciousness. 1 second we were terrified. The next, we were gone. I woke in a panic, sprawled on my back, feeling like something had been standing over me. Dad was beside me, still gripping the knife. My phone was dead. His too, despite being fully charged the night before. We stumbled outside to pee, standing back to back, too spooked to separate. It was still dark, the air cold and still. The food on the table was untouched. The fire burned to ash like it had never been stoked. The whole place felt wrong, like we didn't belong. We waited out the night in silence, packed up at dawn, and didn't talk until we were in the truck. When we told Mom, she laughed it off, said we'd smoked too much, maybe inhaled some weird gas. But we knew better. It was real. Dad saw it, whatever it was, and I felt it. We haven't camped since. That's where the story I've told ends. But it's not the whole truth. Something came back with us. We thought leaving the park would end it. The drive home was quiet, both of us shaken but alive. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see that wall of darkness trailing the truck. Nothing. We dumped our gear in the garage, locked the doors, and tried to forget. But that night, I heard it, the hum, faint, drifting through my bedroom window. I told myself it was the wind, a car engine, anything normal. It wasn't. A week later, Dad found something in the garage. He'd gone to clean our camping stuff, wanted to sell it, get rid of the memories, and there, tucked in the tent bag, was a stone. Flat, black, etched with lines that didn't make sense, like a language no one's spoken in centuries. He showed it to me, hands shaking. "This wasn't ours," he said. We threw it in the trash, watched the truck take it away. The next day, it was back, on the kitchen counter, still damp, like it had been pulled from the river. The hum got louder after that. It'd wake me up some nights, vibrating through the walls. Shadows moved in the house, corners stretching too long, reflections in mirrors that didn't match. Once, I caught a glimpse outside, a shape by the trees in our yard, tall and swaying, gone when I blinked. Dad started hearing it too, the growl, low and wet, following him from room to room. He wouldn't talk about it, but I saw the fear in his eyes, the same look from that night. I dug into the campground's history after that, old forums, local legends, anything I could find. The land had stories, native tribes who'd abandoned it, settlers who vanished, loggers who swore the woods ate their crews. One tale stuck out. A hunter in the 20s who'd camped by the river and come back raving about a black thing that hummed and took his brother. They locked him up, said he'd lost it. But his description matched Dad's, a wall of darkness, alive and wrong. Months passed, and it escalated. The stone kept returning, under my pillow, in my car, on Dad's nightstand. The hum turned to whispers, words I couldn't catch, overlapping like a crowd trapped in static. One night, I recorded it on my phone. The playback was garbled, but I swear I heard my name, stretched and warped, buried in the noise. Dad got sick after that. Fevers, nightmares, muttering about the woods. Doctors couldn't explain it. I knew, though, it was in him. Last year, I went back, alone. I had to know what we'd woken up. I drove to the campground, hiked to our old site by the river. It was empty, abandoned. The info center boarded up. The air was thick again, the sky that same eerie tint. I set up a camera, left it running, and waited. The bangs came first, distant, then close, shaking the ground. The hum followed, drilling into my skull. I saw it then, tall, swaying, a smear of black against the trees. It didn't move right, didn't belong. My camera caught it too, blurred, flickering, with that growl pulsing through the audio. I ran again, left the camera behind. When I got home, my phone pinged. A video file, sent from my own number. It was the footage. Me by the river, the thing looming closer, then a cut to black. When it resumed, I was asleep in my tent from 2 years ago, Dad beside me. Something stood over us, tall and wrong, its edges fraying like smoke, scratched into the frame. You brought me home. Dad's worse now. He doesn't leave his room, just stares at the wall, humming that sound. The stones on his dresser again, wet and cold. I hear the growl outside my window every night, closer each time. Whatever it was, it's not done. It's here, and I think it's waiting for me to sleep. That's where we leave the shadows tonight on No Sleep Nightmares Reddit. From a camper hunted in the Rockies, to kids running from Michigan screams, to a father and son waking something that won't sleep. Did you catch every twist? Or is something still lurking in the dark? Rewind and find out, if you're brave enough. Tell us which nightmare is sticking with you in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the woods aren't done with us yet. More horrors are coming, and they're watching. Sleep tight, or don't.